Hello, welcome to my channel. My name's Beth. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I thought I would go through the 25 books that I really want to read in 2025. I like to do this every year where I'll write a little TBR for the year, and this year I'm really determined to try to read at least 20 of them. A lot of these books are books that I've been recommended personally by people that I know or that I've also seen other booktubers like and enjoy, so they're all books that are really at the top of my list and on my radar for this year. So without further ado, let's get into the list. The first book on my list is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is a Greek mythology retelling. I don't really know much about this book. I have never heard of the Greek myth of Circe, so I literally don't know anything going in, but I have had my book club read it and I think majority of them did enjoy it, and I also had a friend read it recently and he really enjoyed it and it was one of his favourite books of the year, so it's definitely high on my TBR list. I know that it has some witchcraft elements which I'm quite looking forward to, as I did enjoy that in Wayward, which I read last year, and also I know Madeline Miller is known for her excellent writing, so I'm excited to hopefully get to this one and enjoy it. I do own a physical copy of this book as well, so it will also count towards getting my physical TBR list down, which is also a bonus. The next book on my list is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. Again, I don't really know much about this book. All that I know is it's a bit of a whodunit, and I believe it's about elderly people that are at a care home and they decide to band together to solve a murder. I've heard very mixed reviews about this book. I know several people that have read it and have either DNF'd it or read it but just really didn't like it. However, I do have it on my physical TBR and I do want to at least give it a go, even if I end up DNFing it. I did also see someone do a review on it where they compared it to Only Murders in the Building, the TV show, which I absolutely love that TV show, so if I can kind of have that sort of mindset behind it, then I might find it a little bit more enjoyable. But yeah, it's just one that I really want to get off my TBR list and I want to at least give it a go, because I know it has rave reviews, but it seems that everyone I know personally hasn't actually liked it, but I'm still willing to give it a go. I think it would be like a cozy whodunit, something to just read, and I think the chapters are super short, so it might be something that I can kind of binge in just a few days. The next book on my list is something that's been on my physical TBR since I was a teenager, and it's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. This has literally been on my TBR since I was like 16 or 17. I bought it when I was in school and I just never got around to reading it. I've actually been putting off watching the film for that entire duration because I always said I was going to read the book first, so I really just need to get to reading this book because I've heard it's really good. It's about a man who is in, I believe, a mental asylum, a mental facility, and all I know is that there's a tyrannical nurse that runs the facility, and I think there's some sort of uprising or something. I honestly don't know anything, but flicking through the physical book there were sketches and drawings in it which I thought was really interesting and a really unique spin on the book, because I never see images in books anymore, so I did really like that aspect, and I've just heard amazing things about both the film and the book, and I really want to at least have read the book before I then watch the film, and like I said, I've literally been putting this off for nearly 10 years, so I need to just get on it now. The next book I want to read is The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. This was actually given to me in my book club, did a Christmas blind date with a book where we all wrapped up a book, brought it in, and then all exchanged. So this was the book that I chose, and from what I remember, it's a historical fiction and there's some sort of travelling bookshop, and I believe there's a bit of family drama because I think it's about a woman who either marries or is set to marry this man and she maybe doesn't necessarily get on with his family, and there's a travelling bookshop. I honestly don't really know anything about it. This is literally all coming off the top of my head, but I don't really like to know too much about books before I go into them. Sometimes I think it's nice to just have a vague idea and a recommendation and just give it a go. But yeah, it's a book that I don't know all that much about, but my friend read it and she enjoyed it, and she did say that she thought it would be right up my alley, so I am looking forward to giving it a go. The next book on my list is another book that I've had for a while, and that is The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. I actually did start reading this a few years ago, and for whatever reason I put it down. I do want to pick it back up and I do want to give it a go. It's about these two sisters, I believe they're even twins, and they're both black but they can be white passing, and they basically get split up, and one of them chooses to live as a white woman and the other chooses to live as a black woman, and then I believe they come together again and we sort of see how their lives are different. It's a book that I don't really know that much about, but I do enjoy the idea of the premise, and it's something that I have both on my Kindle and as a physical copy, so I'll probably read it on my Kindle, but it means I can also tick it off as a physical TBR completed. The next book is The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. This is a book that I've literally heard so many people raving about, and I believe it's it's now been made into a TV show. So many people I know have read this book and absolutely adored it, and my boyfriend was actually bought a copy for Christmas, so I have asked if I can add it to my TBR list for the year. It was already a book that I had on my radar, but now that I've got a physical copy of it, it just means it's a bit more likely that I'm going to actually read it, and I'm definitely going to prioritise it this year. I believe it's about a man who is in charge of doing all of the number tattoos on the prisoners in Auschwitz, and obviously it's set in World War II times, and I've heard that it's a very sad and moving book, but I also believe it has this hopeful element to it, or at least I'm hoping, because I don't just want a depressing read, but I have a feeling it has a hopeful element to it, at least towards the end. There's also a romance subplot as well, which I'd be quite interested to read, and it is based on real life, so it's always fascinating to read a historical fiction that is very much centred around real life events. The next book on my list is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. As I've said in my other videos, I've really enjoyed every Emily Henry book that I've read so far, and I do really want to prioritise reading her this year. The reason why Book Lovers is a little bit more of a priority read for me is because I do actually own a physical copy, so I really want to get this one read before I pick up her other books. However, I do really see myself hopefully reading a few more Emily Henry books this year as well, because like I said before, I really enjoy them and I think they're the perfect summer reads, but Book Lovers is at the top of my list at the moment. The next book that I want to read is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This is a non-fiction memoir about Chanel Miller, who was the victim of the Stanford raping that was very famous in America. And I've heard that it's extremely heavy and extremely sad and rage fueling, but I have heard that it's an incredibly written book and it's a really powerful story, so it's something that I have on my Kindle, and I do really want to prioritise it as one of my non-fiction reads this year. Definitely not something that I'm necessarily looking forward to reading, but I do think it will be a really powerful story and a really thought-provoking book. The next book I have is Period Power by Maisie Hill. This is a non-fiction book that is centred around women's menstrual cycles. It's a book that I've had for many years and I've always meant to read it. As someone who menstruates, I think it's just good to be clued up on that sort of thing, so it's a book I do want to prioritise this year, even if I'm just reading it along some of the other fictional books that I'm reading. I have owned my copy for quite a few years and it's always a book that I really want to be reading, so I need to just prioritise it this year. I think you can tell I'm on a little bit of a non-fiction hype with the last few books. I really want to try to read 5 non-fiction books in 2025. I know it's not much, but last year I read 4 and the year before I only read 4, so if I can read 5 this year, I'll take that as a win. To go along with that, the next book that I have is Educated by Tara Westover. This is another book that I've just heard amazing things about. It's a memoir, again, about a woman who I believe was raised in an extremely religious setting. I don't know if she was homeschooled or if she wasn't allowed to go to university, but I believe she goes to university and it's all about her being educated on the world, and I think it's kind of a criticism on the way that she was raised, because she was raised in such a controlling way. She wasn't actually exposed to what real life was like and what the world was like. That might be a completely butchered version of it. I don't actually know exactly what it's about, but that's the impression that I've been given, and I'm really looking forward to it. It's a book that I've heard amazing things about. It's one of the best-selling memoirs of recent years, and it's definitely one that's right up there on my TBR list. The next book I wanted to read was Down the Drain by Julia Fox, and I've actually just read this book. I'm not really going to go into my review yet because I'll do that in my monthly wrap-up. But essentially it is about Julia Fox, who you may most likely know from being in Uncut Gems or dating Kanye West. Her life is so much more interesting than that, and her upbringing was actually really horrific and traumatic, and she talks a lot about her issues around addiction and growing up in New York and the people that she meets and the kind of escapades that she finds herself in. Like I said, I won't be doing a full review, but I was so excited to read it and it definitely did reach my expectations, if not went beyond my expectations. Spoiler alert, I actually did really love this book, so I'm glad that I was able to read it. And the final non-fiction book that is on this TBR list is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is again a book that I've actually owned a physical copy of for several years. I believe I bought it for one of my English literature classes at uni and I never got around to reading it, so it is a book I really want to prioritise this year because I have owned it for so long. It's also really short, but I've heard that it's really powerful and very moving, and it talks about the Black experience in America and criticisms of how America is systemically racist. I've heard that it's really well written and it gets its point across really well. Heading back into fiction, the next book on my list is Recursion by Blake Crouch. This is a sci-fi thriller where it is set in the real world, but just with some sci-fi elements, because there is currently an epidemic that is going around that is causing people to have these false memories of lives that they've never lived, and it's causing people to kill themselves because they're so upset because they have these memories of having a child or having a husband or having this job or having a completely different life that's not theirs, and then they realise that that life doesn't exist. It seems that they're going crazy essentially, and we're trying to figure out why it's happening and what it means. The book follows two timelines. We have a present day timeline set in 2018, which is following police officer Barry, and then there is a past timeline set in 2008, which is following scientist Helena. And I have actually started reading this book and I'm really enjoying it so far, but I'll give my full review at the end of the month. But it's definitely a book that I'm enjoying so far, and I'm looking forward to letting you know what I thought. The next book on my list is Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. This is a book that I've just heard so much buzz around, and I was actually recently recommended it by a friend, so it kind of shooted to the top of my TBR list. From my understanding, it follows a bunch of teenagers that live these very rich and lavish lifestyles and all the drama that ensues around them. I think there's a lot of dating and cheating and scandal and all of that sort of thing, and I've heard it compared to Gossip Girl, which is a show that I really loved. I have heard people say that they hate the first couple of books, but then it gets really good, so I don't really know if I'm going to enjoy it or not. I'm just going in with an open mind, and I understand that for a lot of people the series as a whole is a comfort series, so I'm going in with an open mind. I've heard that they're really quick reads, so I'll just see how I get on with it, but it's definitely a book I really want to read this year. The next book on my list is Penance, which again is actually a book that I've already read, but I will give you a quick blurb. It's a novel, but it's written as if it is a true crime book where it tells the events of a 16-year-old girl called Joan who is murdered by 3 of her classmates. It's a true crime non-fiction book that follows these events, and the author essentially adds in excerpts of podcasts, excerpts of Tumblr posts, all this mixed media, which is really interesting, news articles, stuff like that. The person who has wrote it is a journalist, and you're not entirely sure if you trust him, as at the start of the book it does say that it was originally taken off shelves and then has recently been re-released, and you're not really sure why it was taken off shelves or what the context is behind that. I did find it really interesting, and I'll be giving a full review in my monthly wrap-up. The next book on my list is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak, and this is a book that has again been on my TBR for a while. It's a book that I know a lot of people read in school, but it was never something that I read in school. It's set in World War II, and the narrator is death itself. I've heard that it's a very moving and powerful book, and I don't really know much else about it. I've really wanted to go into this book pretty blind because I've heard incredible things, and I know for a lot of people it is their favourite book of all time. I have heard so many amazing things about this book, and it's definitely something that I'm determined to finally read this year, as it's been on my TBR list for quite a while now. I then have Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This book is a young adult romantasy where it follows 2 young adults who are writing to each other through a magic typewriter. I believe they're both journalists, and it takes place during this huge war that's going on. I've heard really, really good things about this book as well. It definitely was a book that went quite viral last year, or maybe the year before. So it's a book that I've had on my TBR for a while, and I really want to get to it because I've heard amazing things. It also is part of a series, so if I get to this one, it means that I can continue the series. The next book on my list is Talking at Night by Claire Daverley. This was actually recommended to me by a friend, and then I've also seen a few other booktubers talk about it recently as well, so it definitely is quite high on my list. I've heard that it's quite similar to Normal People in the sense of it follows these 2 people throughout many years, and I do think there's a bit of a miscommunication trope, which personally didn't bother me in Normal People, so it probably won't bother me with this book either. I've heard really good things. I definitely think it'll be the sort of book that is up my alley and that I'll enjoy, so I'm really looking forward to hopefully reading this one this year. Next up is Demon Copperfield by Barbara Kingsolver. This, I believe, is a recent retelling or inspired by David Copperfield, which I haven't actually read, so that provides me no information, but all I've heard is that this is a really well written book. I know it did receive a lot of buzz, and I was able to get it in the Kindle sale, so I'm excited to read it. I don't really know much going in at all, other than I believe it follows the story of a young boy. I don't know the timeline or anything, but I've just heard amazing things, so I'm going to try and read it this year. The next book on my list is The Wedding People by Alison Espach. This is about a woman who I believe has decided that she wants to take her own life. So she goes to a really fancy hotel, and that's where she wants to do it because I think she just wants to go out with a bang and enjoy her time before she passes. But when she gets to this hotel, she quickly realises that the entire hotel has been rented out for this huge wedding, and she bumps into the bride-to-be, and the bride-to-be essentially tells her, "No, you're not spoiling my wedding. You can't kill yourself now. Please wait until the wedding is over because I'm not having you spoil my big day." And I've heard that it's just a kind of literary fiction comedy. It's very heartwarming, and I believe that it's kind of her understanding that she actually doesn't want to kill herself and that there are things in life that are worth living for. This is a book I'm really excited to read. I've seen really good reviews and I am excited to give it a go because I really like the sound of the premise, and it does sound quite entertaining, the back and forth between the bride and this other main character. The next book I want to read in 2025 is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I actually haven't heard that much about this book. All I know is that at least one of the characters is a chess master or something, or does something to do with chess, and I believe it does follow two brothers, but they both have these slightly different paths. I really like Sally Rooney. I think I'm always chasing that high of Normal People because Normal People is arguably one of my favourite books ever. I have enjoyed some of her other books and some of them have been a little bit hit or miss for me, but she definitely is an author that I always want to read what she's writing because I do like her writing style and I do find her books quite easy to read and I like the characters that she creates. I'm looking forward to reading this one. I've heard it's a little bit darker and that's definitely something that I'm up for reading. The next book on my list is Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. Obviously this book has not even come out yet, so I literally don't know much about it at all, other than it is a prequel to The Hunger Games. This book is set before the original Hunger Games trilogy, but after the prequel that came out a few years ago, and it sets place in the 50th Hunger Games, which starred Haymitch, who is Peter and Katniss's mentor. And all we know about this games is that in his games there are double the contestants. Instead of the usual 24 contestants, there were 48 contestants and there was still only one winner. I'm really excited about this. I love the Hunger Games universe. It's one of my favourite, if not my favourite series ever. So I'm really looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to seeing another games and I'm looking forward to seeing more characters and how this is all going to develop. I'm definitely up for more books of other games because I just find the universe extremely interesting and I love her writing style and how fast-paced these books are. The next book on my list is actually another Emily Henry book, and that is Funny Story by Emily Henry. I think I was torn between Happy Place and Funny Story. I really want to read both of them, but I think I'm really going to like the male love interest in Funny Story, so I put that one on my list. So the premise of the book is that there are two couples that both go through breakups, and two of the people from the couples end up getting together, and the other two people that are left on their own end up living together and they're both going through this heartbreak at the same time. And I believe it's how their friendship forms and their relationship develops. I don't really know all that much about the actual plot and what else happens, but I really do like the premise and I've heard really good things about the male main character, so I'm excited to read this one and I think it will be really entertaining like all of Emily Henry books are. The next book I have on my list is When in Rome by Sarah Adams. This is a romance book that follows a pop star who ends up living in a small town and I think ends up falling for the local baker. I don't really know anything about the plot, but I've just heard really good things. I've heard that it's a really lovely romance and it's got a lot of like witty banter as well, and I just heard loads of people absolutely love this book when it came out a few years ago, so it's been on my TBR for a while and I think it will be a really lovely spring summer read. And the final book I have on my 2025 reading list is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This is a book that has been on my TBR for ages and it is one of my best friend's favourite ever books, so I've been meaning to read this for so long and for whatever reason I just haven't gotten around to it yet, but I'm determined to read it this year. I don't really know much about it at all I know that it follows the character of Eleanor Oliphant and I believe that she comes across as autistic. I've heard that it is a very moving but entertaining book and I honestly don't know anything else. I'm going into this book completely blind, but it's just a book that I've heard everyone rave about for many, many years. I think it's one of those books that everyone has read other than me, so I do really want to get around to reading it this year because I've had so many good things and I hope I really enjoy it. So that's everything. Those are the 25 books that I want to read in 2025. If you've read any of them and enjoyed, please do let me know in the comments down below, or if any of them are also on your TBR, do let me know. I'm hoping to read all of these books this year. We'll see how I get on. I'm hoping to at least read 20, but I might not manage to read the whole 25. And I will be doing monthly wrap-ups on this channel, so at the end of every month I'll be talking you through every single book I read and my thoughts and ratings on them all. So be sure to subscribe if these are the sort of books that you also want to hear more about or find out my thoughts on, because hopefully these will be the main books that I'm reading this year. 2 of my goals this year are to read 10 books off my physical TBR and 5 non-fiction books, so I tried to centre the 25 books around that because those are 2 goals that I really want to try to achieve this year. I really hope you enjoyed the video and I'll hopefully see you in my next one. Bye!